podcast too.
What is up, everyone? I'm back for the second installment of Making the Grade, the weekly live stream that I'm going to be doing throughout the season, where we look at the Cardinals PFF grades and try to figure out what stories are the data telling us. Now, last week I was joined with Blake Murphy. Today it's just me. We've got the solo thing going on, but I'm looking forward to getting into these grades with you. I've kind of looked over myself. You know, some of the things jumped out at me. We'll get into that. We'll go over the offense, defense, talk about things that I'm seeing, and maybe you can talk about some of the things you're seeing in the chat. So I appreciate y'all being here. We're gonna do this every week, Monday night, and I'm looking forward to this. If you know my content, you know I love the analytics side, the PFF side. So I'm excited. I want to say hey to Hank Hill, got the comment. I like the thumbnail. It looks sharp. Thank you so much. Trying something a little different with it. I really like the way it's turning out to the thumbnail for this. So if you're here with us hanging out, get something in the chat so I can say hey to you. But let's jump right into the grades. Cardinals, obviously the game it started out well, up 20-0, and then it got very disappointing, right? We blew the lead 31-28 in the end. Very frustrating game, right? So we're going to get into some of the grades and talk about that. We're going to start on the offensive side. We'll say hey to Simon. What's up, buddy? Just was chatting with him in the Discord. If you aren't part of the Discord, there is a link in the description. Make sure you join. Got a great group of folks in there hanging out. We got Arthur. Thank you for being here. Appreciate you hanging out with us. So let's get into it. All right, and what I want to start with is the offensive line. We talked about that a bit last week and the blocking. So, we're going to sort this by the pass blocking snaps. So it kind of brings the offensive lineman up to the front. And what we see from the beginning is that the run blocking was better this week. Last week, it was really bad. This week, it's, it wasn't great, but it was not abysmal. Paris Johnson Jr. had a respectable grade. Will Hernandez, again, Froholt was decent. Humphrey struggled a bit, as did Wilkinson. We'll get to that. But the pass blocking, especially on the interior, was worse. It was not good. If you remember last week, the pass blocking was better and the run blocking was abysmal. Well, they kind of flipped that, right? Now, Humphreys had a really, really good pass blocking grade, a 5.8. Paris Johnson Jr.'s, his was like average. There was like basic, it averages out to him, not being great or horrible. He's been consistent. Last week his grades were reasonably good. So Paris Johnson Jr. has looked good as a rookie, right? Starting at right tackle. So he's been probably the most consistent offensive lineman. Will Hernandez has been pretty good too. His pass blocking was down this week, but he was still, the highest graded offensive lineman. So overall, we saw kind of this flip, right? The pass blocking was bad, but the run blocking was better. But one thing stays the same here, and that is our buddy Elijah Wilkinson has struggled mightily. His grade of 35.4 was really bad. His pass blocking grade 22.1 was bad. If we look like, let's see. If we look at like last week, it was 30.7. So he actually improved, but there was such a low bar, right? That 35 is just not good enough. So Elijah Wilkinson is a concern. He had those false start penalties like back to back. That was a problem. And this is a guy who, and I showed this last week. You look at his career grades, has graded most seasons in the 60s, a couple in the 50s. He's been a decent player. That's a guy that should be an average starter, decent but not great. But he's been absolutely abysmal. And I don't know what it is. We were talking about it in the Discord earlier. For those of you that are there, is it just that he's transitioning? I mean, to just a new team? Is he struggling? Is he injured? Has something gone wrong in terms of, is he declining? I don't know what it is. Certainly some folks talk about how he had some really tough matchups, but our whole offensive line had tough matchups. And, when you're grading in the 30s, that's more than just a tough matchup. And, Mark Jackson, thanks for being here. Is he banged up? I haven't heard anything. He wasn't on the injury report, so I don't know, and I have to wonder. Real quick, Omar, thanks for being here. As soon as I saw they were coming back, I knew we were going to lose. It felt like it, right? Right? So Wilkinson, this is just, you have to wonder, is he going to get benched like this week? Is he going to be starter on week 3? If he is a starter, he better play well, or he's not going to be long for that starting lineup. Someone else is going to be, put in there if he keeps playing that poorly. He has been the weakest link on this offensive line. Froholt hasn't been great, but he hasn't been as abysmal as Wilkinson. And, I think Froholt is much less likely to be benched than Wilkinson, because your center, all the things they have to do in terms of, picking up the blocks and all the things that they do. And he's been that starting center since the beginning of training camp. So even though Froholt's grades have been not that great, I think he was a little bit better this week. In fact, let's take a look at it real quick. Last week, 46.9, this week, 54.2. So Froholt, got a little bit better this week than last week. It was better in the run blocking for sure. Not as good in the pass blocking, but I think it's much that, they don't have a great alternative to him. I think that Froholt is probably secure in that job unless something, he really takes a nosedive or gets injured. But Wilkinson, I'd be surprised. I mean, if he keeps playing like this, there's no way you can keep starting him. So that is going to be something to keep watching. Let's say a couple other folks who just jumped in. Michael Evans, thanks for being here. Back to Constitution 1. Thank you for being here. Appreciate you. Hello, Professor. The 2 somewhat winnable games were not won. When do you think we'll win? One hug will come. When will, that's a great question. And so, that's a little kind of off the grades, but let me we'll look at the Cardinals schedule and kind of talk about that real quickly. So, you look at their schedule, they've got Dallas coming up. Obviously, you don't anticipate a win there. San Francisco, you don't. The Bengals, they've struggled, but that's that. If the Bengals don't get their stuff together, that's maybe. The Rams you would look at as a game that maybe, right? Seattle, it's a little bit of a wild card. Baltimore, you wouldn't expect to be favored. Cleveland's playing reasonably well. Atlanta's 2-0, right? And that's a team that runs the ball really well, but they don't. The quarterback play is the question for them. Houston, right? That's the game you would hope we win. I wouldn't be shocked if our first win is at Houston, right? But here's the caveat: like if Kyler comes back, I think it's a very different team, right? The offense looks very different. So like that could really change that. And you just never know. I mean, sometimes. You've watched football, sometimes a team just wins a game that they had no business winning. Josh Rosen beating the Packers. So if you ask me the first game that looks like the Texans is the first game you look at, and then you're like, oh, we hopefully should win that. I do think they pull off a win somewhere before there. I don't know if it's going to be because Kyler comes back and they start cruising a little earlier, or they just manage to, gut out a win. Because they have been competitive in these 2 games. They're teams that don't look like they're good teams, but this team does look like, it's they're buying in, right? I mean, we were talking about this in the Discord. This team has a lot of players starting who should be backups, a lot of replacement level players on the roster, and a lot of young players. And yes, Buddha out. He's on the IR. He's going to be out at least 4 weeks, right? So I think even though it's a disappointing loss, is the fact that it was this close in 2 games, even against bad teams, to me is that the coaching staff has actually done a really good job. So that's my thought. So Cruz Espero, thank you for being here. I like these close losses, but I don't like giving up the lead we need to throw the ball more. So, I mean, you hate to lose a game where you had that kind of lead for sure. Right. Let's see. Question about, his grade was actually really good. Unlimited snaps, 86.4. He only had 13 snaps. His best part of his grade was in coverage. He had a really good coverage grade at 84.9 snaps. So high grade in limited snaps. So Isaiah Simmons was feeling it, right? So So yeah, Boston Ford, thanks for being here. I love Connor's passion yesterday in the first half. Gardeck too, 100%. So yeah, I mean, it's gonna be a while before I worry about, I don't know, it's tough because they're showing signs, and but then like this week the offense looked better. Last week the offense really struggled. It looked better this week, but the defense gave up all those points. But Daniel Jones had him a game, that's for sure. So offensive line, the big takeaway for me is Paris Johnson. His grades are not like elite, but he's looked solid and consistent, and I think he's going to be fine. I think he's just going to keep getting better. Wilkinson, woof, something's got to be done. He's got to play better or get out of that lineup. Hernandez continues to be steady. I think he's going to be our steadiest, most reliable offensive lineman. Froholt, hopefully he'll get better. And Humphreys was a little bit better. So yeah. Connor mentioned Connor. Connor had a solid grade. His grade last week was better at 71.2 this week. He graded last week in the 80s. He was 83.3 last week, right? So the grade went down a little bit. His running grade went down from 86.3 to 69.9. I think that running grade, I think like he had more yards this week, over 100 yards. Last week he had, was it 50 something? It wasn't as many yards, but he was effective. But as we see here, the run blocking was better by the offensive line. So I think he didn't have to overcome as much, right? He didn't have to make up for as many deficiencies in the run blocking as he did last week. His grade was still good, really good in the pass blocking. Had some nice runs. So, Connor continues to just be a really outstanding player. Xbox fan, thank you for being here. Appreciate that. And yes, thank you for the reminder for everyone to smash the like and subscribe button. Really appreciate the support of everyone. So Connor looks good. I want to talk about Ingram too, because if you watched this live stream last week, you may recall one of the things I mentioned is that Ingram did not have any pass blocking snaps. And when you're a running back, your ability to kind of help out in terms of pass blocking, right, picking up those blocks is important to staying on the field. And I kind of point out, hey, he had 0 pass blocking snaps. And I asked, is that because they don't trust him in that? Has he not shown an ability to do that well? If he wants to be on the field more, he's going to have to be able to show that he can do that. Well, lo and behold, he had 3 pass blocking snaps and graded really well, 79.7. Yes, it's a small sample size, but that's an encouraging sign. So hopefully we'll continue to see that. And if we continue to see that, his future, getting on the field is going to be promising. DeMarcado had 8 snaps, good in the blocking as well, right? So we're seeing some good pass blocking from the running backs. Really, our running backs have played really well. And I know there were some, listen, I thought in the draft they should have drafted a running back somewhere on day 3. They didn't. They brought back Connor, Ingram, had a couple guys, that they were, and obviously Marlon Mack got injured, unfortunately. But they didn't go into the season with Connor, Ingram, and DeMarcado. And, that didn't sound like maybe a very exciting backfield, maybe even a concerning backfield. But so far, the running game has been pretty good for the Cardinals. The running backs have been good. They graded reasonably well. The pass blocking. So, that's been a solid group for this team. Now, want to talk about also now the tight ends, because that's something we talked about last week as well. And we talked about Trey McBride, and in terms of what his snaps, and he performed. He outperformed Zach Ertz, at least in a grade basis, and he did again this week, right? He had a 78.7 grade, solid in the passing, pass blocking, run blocking was solid. Across the board, he was really good. Ertz was okay, right? His pass blocking was his weakest area. 66.3 is not a bad grade, but Ertz, again, wasn't, the grades weren't great. Swaim's grades were down, but he's again mostly a blocking, although he had more pass downs and fewer blocking than he did last week. In fact, the blocking snaps were a little more even. But what I do want to point out is we're going to look at each of these individually. Trey McBride, or we'll start with Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz, from this week to that. Last week he had 48 snaps. This week he had 44. So Trey McBride snaps went down. Okay. I'm sorry. Zach Ertz's snaps went down. So Zach Ertz still led all tight end snaps, but he went from 48 to 44. Trey McBride, something we all want to see, encouraging sign. His grades, he graded even better this week than last week, all around. And his snaps went up from 23 to 32. So that, we talked about wanting to see more Trey McBride, wondering is it going to be a changing of the guard with him becoming the number one option. This is a player that all our Cardinals fans, myself included, are excited about. They want to see more. Last season as a rookie, came out very slow, came on towards the end of the season, showed a few things. Some people were down on him, but if you follow football closely enough, you understand tight ends just take a little time to get ready and acclimate. They have so many responsibilities: blocking, receiving, run blocking, pass blocking, right? So it just takes a year or two for tight ends to really hit their stride typically. So this is where we want to see McBride taking that step, and we're seeing it, right? His grade was pretty good last week and better this week. Snaps are going up. So we want to see this trend continue to happen with McBride, right? We want to see him continue to play well, and we want to see those snaps go up, and we're seeing it, right? Omar saying, I like how McBride played. Ertz missed a TD grab, but can't really blame him on that one. Yeah, that like the one, obviously last week there was the one that was a high, and then this week he was overthrown a little bit. Dobbs had that play action pass. I as that happened, I just sat there and thought Kyler would make that throw. Kyler would make that throw, right? But yeah, Mark Jackson saying McBride played really well. Michael Evans said, yeah, nice. So that's encouraging. And then Jeff Swaim, just real quick to round out the tight ends. Swaim, his snaps also went up. His grade went down. And his snaps went up much more in the passing game than he last week he only had 2 passing snaps. Everything else was blocking. This week he had 10. So some interesting things we're seeing there, right? So to me, that's, and again, this season, we know this is sort of it's a rebuild season. It's sort of a lost season, at least in terms of the Cardinals, contending. They're just, they're not, we all know they're not a playoff team. That's not happening. We're looking at the process, right? And the process is getting playing time for the younger players and seeing them develop, right? And seeing good things. So we're seeing that, right? Paris Johnson Jr. is playing and looking solid. Trey McBride is taking that step forward, right? So there's some places where we're seeing some good indicators of what we're looking for with the Cardinals. Trey McBride looking like he can truly be a number one tight end and maybe even a really good one in this league, right? So that's encouraging. Simon saying the coaches use Ertz and McBride differently. They have McBride playing fullback out wide, whereas Ertz is obviously moved to they're doing some different things for sure. Hollywood made catches this week. Yeah, he played well also. Looking at like Hollywood Brown, his grade was 64.5, which is reasonably decent, right? Had a couple nice catches. And the receivers in general this week graded better than last week. You may remember last week the grades weren't all that high. Rondale Moore's grade wasn't great. It was a little bit low, but like Michael Wilson's grade was up from last week. Pascal got more snaps this week and his grade was good. Right. And then we look at Marquise Brown, right? He had a reasonable grade. So saw a little bit more out of the receivers this week, right? Than we did last week. So that's encouraging. So, the offensive line, like we said, the offensive line wasn't great. It was better running, a little bit worse pass blocking with the exception of Humphreys. So the offensive line has kind of gone back and forth. We need to see them again. If Wilkinson can just get his stuff together and if he can grade in the 50s, if Wilkinson can grade in the 50s, we're going to be a reasonable offensive line with what we're seeing, right? So we need to see some improvement there. The receivers, okay, right? Josh Dobbs played well. Like, listen, his running grade, 90.6. He had that one huge touchdown run. His passing grade, 68.4, was okay. Josh Dobbs was competent in this offense. People were down on him, and I get it. The fumbles were really frustrating. He is a backup. He is not a starter, right? But I see why they're starting him. He knows the system. He looks better in it. And I think he is the right choice right now with who they have on the roster, at least to start until Kyler gets back. And hopefully he'll continue to, play competent football. he played well enough for this team to win. It was really, as we'll talk about, the defense really kind of struggling in the second half. Yes, if the offense could have put something up, a field goal, that would have gone a long way. You could put that on the offensive play calling a little bit in the second half, perhaps, maybe not running the ball to, milk the clock, maybe not doing some things, I don't know, to get some points up there. But Dobbs played reasonably well. So on the offensive side of the ball, to me, there's definitely some issues, but the offense wasn't the problem this week. The offense, considering like I said, we with all the things we're dealing with, Kyler being out and injured, with kind of some young receivers, not having a true number one receiver, with all the things we're working with, the offense did their job, I think, about as well as we could have expected. Like putting up 28 points. Yes, defense helped out with some of that, with some of the turnovers and stuff, but putting up 28 points and looking competent as an offense, like that's like a really good outcome for where this team is right now. That, we got about everything we could have asked out of this offense, considering the circumstances, right? But the defense, right? Real quick, want to say hey to Classy Nasty. Interesting. Yep, for sure. Boston Fort saying Dobbs always sounds smart and confident in the press conferences. I like it. He has a life outside of football. I wonder if that helps him relax, knowing all his eggs aren't in the football basket. Listen, you got to have in life, you got to have something, a distraction. So I know people get up on, sometimes criticize that. They think people should be always football all the time. You have to have something to do that, or you won't be able to focus. So yeah. Mark Jackson saying game one, lost the trenches. Both sides do play better. They do. Yeah, they do. And the offensive line, again, struggled. One week it's the running blocking. Next week it's the pass blocking. But, I'm not mad at the offense. Again, let's remember where we're at. It's a rebuild. A lot of young players, a lot of new players, new coaching staff, backup quarterback starting. 28 points and the way the offense performed, I'm not mad at that, considering where we're at. Now, where I'm not going to say mad, but where I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed, right, is the defense. Now, the grades aren't bad, right? Well, with the exception of a few, and we'll get to that. Whew. All right. The big picture, though, as we know, is the defense was outstanding in the first half, right? Shut out the Giants, allowed the team to put a 20-0 lead, and then the second half happened. And Daniel Jones looked like an all-pro quarterback at points. He's not that good. He's not as bad as he was in week one, but I don't think he's as good of a quarterback as he looked like this game. But they kept putting points back, and it was just demoralizing, right? And that's what happened. So the defensive grades are kind of interesting because it is a little tale of two halves, right? But let's start right from the beginning. Victor Dimukeje, right? Victor Dimukeje has been a really nice surprise this year, right? He had the highest grade on defense, 84.8. If we look at his grades so far this season, 76.6, 84.8. Now, again, if you watched the stream last week, you may remember that we talked about how his pass rushing grade wasn't great, but his run defense, his tackling, that he played more as he was more of a run stopper kind of defensive, outside linebacker, and that Gardeck seemed to be more the pass rusher, but his pass rush grade was 79.0, right? And he had a sack. He improved across the board with the exception of coverage, which whatever, it's one snap, that's not what they're paying him to do. He got better, right? So Dimukeje, a guy who was 6th round pick for Duke. He was a guy from the last, regime. He was, and if you've been watching my stuff for a while, I'm a big fan of kind of drafting pass rushers on day 2 and 3 and developing them. And Dimukeje is looking like so far he's looking really good, like he's developing. And that's a great thing to see, because the question has been, where's our pass rush coming from, right? Well, it's come from thus far, right? Dimukeje and Gardeck. So that's nice to see. Maybe he's a good fit. Maybe he's taking that step. Whatever it is, so far we're seeing some nice things with Dimukeje. And remember, I've been talking about this on my live streams. Yes, we know the season's going to be rough. So what we want to look for and be excited about as fans is which players are going to step up and emerge. Someone's going to pop. Someone's going to arrive. Some players are going to become players. Okay. Is it Dimikaji? It's too early to say for sure, but he's sure looking like a solid player, right? So this is again. This is part of that process. See who's kind of emerging, right? Simon, yeah, Dimikaji deserve a deep dive. Listen, we were talking about that in the Discord, and listen, if he keeps this up, we'll probably see one. I mean, he would be a great candidate for that, right? Doug, thanks for being here. My only consolation is that a lot of young guys are playing well, and that's what we gotta. That's what we gotta. That's what we gotta hang our hat on, right? So Dimikaji is a bright spot, right? He has looked good both of these games. Love seeing it, right? And it's interesting because I talked about this with Gardeck. We're all looking for, we were all going into the season expecting Cameron Thomas and Myjai Sanders to be the guys that would emerge, and then BJ Ojulari, they draft him. But so far, it's been Gardeck and Dimikaji, the guys who've been around for at least a couple years that have shown out so far. Carlos Watkins had a nice game, only on 10 snaps, but wrote part of the defensive line rotation. Kaiser White had a nice game. I think it was better. Let's see, his first game, I think that was, his last game, he only had a 61.6 grade, struggled in pass rush and coverage. This week, he was better, 77.4. And his running mate, Chris Barnes, also had a good grade. Like, our inside linebackers both played well, so that was certainly nice to see. Andre Cheshire, I think I'm butchering that, but the safety played well and 63 snaps. That's a lot of snaps. This is a guy that, wasn't really, he's kind of a journeyman, had been with Philadelphia. I think that's where, Philadelphia. So obviously the staff there knew him, but look, his grades in the past were in the 30s. So this guy has been a practice squad type player. And his first game, he only played 3 snaps. Grade was okay. And this had a really good game. So that, I would not expect that to continue. I just, he's probably a player who's a marginal player like that, will have good games and bad games, but we'll see. Watch him prove me wrong. I hope he does. Jalen Thompson's grade went up from last week. And he also, just to point out, looking at, his snaps, I know it's a little hard to see, but these are his snaps by alignment, slot cornerback right here. You had 55 slot corner last week, 49 this week. We talked about that last week. He had 9 as in the box as safety or linebacker alignment, 17 this week. Last week he had 5 as a free safety, 0 here. And that's cornerback as an outside corner, 1 and 2. So, but the big takeaway here is they're continuing to play Jalen Thompson as that primary slot cornerback. So that's another thing we're seeing with him. Got a comment here. Doug saying another nice thing is some of these guys are playing well, aren't going to command a huge salary anytime. So yeah, they're on their rookie deal, right? That cost control for sure. So Gardeck, his grade 71.5 wasn't quite as good as it was last week. He had a really good grade last week, right? In the was it 90s? It was pushing 90. Gardeck last week 91.2. So his grade was down. His pass rushing grade was down. His run defense grade was up a little bit. Coverage was up. But that, his pass rushing grade was down a little bit. I know, he had a sack, but his grade, if PFF grades, it takes all plays into account. So he had a couple good plays, but the rest were maybe a little more average. So his grade was down, but he's still, pass rush is kind of hit or miss, right? So Simon's saying real quick, I disagree with the PFF grades on Shashiri. He got exposed on the back end. Long bomb to Jay Hyatt, and I think PFF attributed maybe they did, but again, something to remember: one play doesn't sink your grades, right? And he played 63 plays, right? So even if he had a couple bad plays, he can offset it with the other plays. So that is something to keep in mind, right? But yeah, Dennis Gardeck, his pass rush grade is down, but still 71.5 is a good grade. So we're seeing, Gardeck continuing to be good for this team. Lucetta playing well. Lucetta, we talked about his fullback play, right? But Lucetta has graded solidly, like 64.8 is a reasonable grade last week, 70.7 this week. he's, again, pass rush is so more of the tackling in terms of the grades. But, he's a guy, again, seventh round pick from last year who was kind of on the practice squad and then back on the roster. He's another interesting guy who's being just a night doing his role, right? And performing well. What's up, Mikey Desicaro? Appreciate you being here, Mikey. The person who wrote the lyrics for that intro song that we did. Good to have you here. I appreciate you hanging out with us. So, we're seeing Lucada, playing some ball for them solidly. Cameron Thomas, we see, his grade. He was kind of around here this last week too, in the 60s, I believe. Yep, his grade went up just slightly. He's been decent but not exceptional in terms of grade. So that's, we'd like to see a little bit more out of him, a little more juice. But he's doing okay. Want to see a little bit more. Wallace had another nice game. He's been a nice pickup. So, getting some decent play out of him. Zaven Collins now. Collins last week, his grade wasn't as good as his stat line. This week, his grade was up a little bit from last week. Yeah, 57.7 to 64.1. But I want to point out that the same thing that I talked about last week continues to kind of be the deal with him. Again, you look at his stat line, especially, last week with the interception and fumble recovery, and you're like, oh man, how is his F grade so low? Well, again, it reflected well in coverage, but like we talked about last week, he has not been an edge rusher primarily. Like he doesn't have those pass rush moves like someone who's been doing that for years. They moved him to edge. He's going to excel in the coverage and he's going to be decent tackling. But when it comes to the pass rush skills, he's going to take some time to develop those moves. So I guess what I would say with Zaven Collins is, even if he's making plays, just be prepared for his grades to maybe be a little underwhelming many weeks, because his pass rush, he's going to get home on some sacks from effort, right? Bull rushing, just having a good rep, but he's not going to do something that like Gardeck can do. Gardeck, will run stunts. He will do spin moves. Gardeck will do some legitimate pass rushing moves and beat guys sometimes. Zaven Collins it's going to be much less often he does that, right? So, that's to me not surprising there to see that his grade isn't great, because I think just the thing that his position now is so heavily dependent on, and PFF, based on positions, they do weight different things, different grades differently in the overall grade. Like, for example, if you're a cornerback, the coverage grade is weighed much more high, much heavier in your overall grade than if you're like a defensive lineman. I don't know exactly the weighting. I just know that they have, based on positions, some different kinds of things like that go into it. So, paying an outside linebacker that pass rush grade is going to be maybe not as consistently good. So that's just something to keep an eye on. BJ Ojulari, limited snaps, okay grade. We want to see some more out of him. It's going to take a little bit of time. Defensive line, there's a few defensive linemen here in the mix. I'd say overall the grades were actually better than last week. I think there were some higher grades, but I think there were fewer really low grades. But where the grades were not good were the cornerbacks, with the exception of Jalen Thompson. He's considered a cornerback, right, for the purposes of the way they grade, or with how they played him as a slot corner, right? But we look at, or we'll do it by grade. Marco Wilson, right? Marco Wilson was just awful. And I like Marco Wilson. I want him to do well. And a 29.6 with a coverage grade of 29.7. That just was ugly. Let's see. He gave up 165 yards. Yeah. And one touchdown. 165 yards in a tutty, right? Not good. So Marco Wilson, listen, I did a deep dive video on him. He was showing us some stuff last season. I still think, he has a lot of potential. He is much. You need him to be your number 2, not your number 1, probably. But this was a bad game for him. Keitrell Clark, his grade was okay. In the 50s isn't exceptional, but for a rookie 6th rounder starting, I think that's still pretty good. The fact that he, is not getting completely exposed, right? His grade was a little bit better last week, 59.3. It's 53.4 this week. His coverage grade was comparable. Really, it was the tackling grade that went down. So, your outside starting cornerback struggled, right? Hamilton continued to get limited snaps, 3 snaps. So, the coverage wasn't great. And a lot of that was really that second half, right? So, it wasn't good. So let's get to some of the comments here. So this, we've kind of gone over what we're seeing in the grades, right? Some nice things with some players. Coverage, really, with the exception of Jalen Thompson, wasn't great. But some nice pass rush, some nice tackling here and there. Second half, though. Boston Force saying MMA, you have specialists, you have straight up fighters. With Warrior Gardeck is a straight up fighter. Love that dude, 100%. Is Marco Wilson using banana peels for cleats? He keeps slipping over. I don't know, man. Yeah, hard to, who knows? Mikey, I'm doing good, brother. I appreciate you. I am thriving. I'm doing really well. So thank you for asking. Dan, thanks for being here. Spilled water on my keyboard on the screen. Hi, folks. How did Dante Stills grade compared to preseason? So Dante Stills didn't grade particularly well, 41.5. Let's bring him up and take a look. He didn't play the first week, right? It looks like, at least not on defense. He had 18 snaps, wasn't great. His tackling grade was okay. Pass rush wasn't great. It wasn't great. Preseason, let's look at. We'll have to go to preseason here. Preseason, he had a couple. Games that were graded better, right? So, still as a 6th rounder, he's going to need to develop some. I like him as a player, as a guy who could be a depth rotation player, but yeah. What are you going to do, right? All right. So yeah, he not great, but he's a 6th rounder. I guess, it's kind of what you're going to get with him. Hank saying still pissed because you're white with the penalty. Yeah. Those flags, he's getting them, isn't he? So this is kind of what we're seeing. So we've kind of gone through offensive, defensive grades. Real quick, I'll show you New York's grades again. On offense, Daniel Jones, 92.5. Just an elite grade that he put up on us. Jalen Hyatt, 89.9. He had some nice plays. Darren Waller, decent grade. Darius Slayton, okay. Barkley, his grades were okay. I felt like the Cardinals did a reasonable job against Barkley, all things considered. John Michael Schmitz had a bounce back game, 69.3. We all love him around here, even though he's not on our team. So you see the grades going on down, right? Their tackles, Evan Neal struggled, right? So, they had some really high grades in a couple players. Defensively, Dexter Lawrence, he was eating Elijah Wilkinson's lunch, right? Isaiah Simmons, we showed that early, had a good grade in limited snaps. Cornerback Hawkins, decent. Leonard Williams, Shane Jimenez, Ashawn Robinson. Down here, they struggled with their linebackers, though, right? And that's probably our running backs doing well. We're probably part of, and our tight ends, probably part of the reason that they struggled there. Rookie Deontay Banks, cornerback, struggled for them. So, they had a couple players do really well, and that's probably looks like that's because, their matchup with Wilkinson and Froholt. So yeah. So, okay. So what I want to do from here is, for just maybe a few minutes, we've gone through the grades, is get your comments, questions, like players that stood out to you, anything, we'll do maybe 10 minutes of Q&A, anything you want to share, or etc. Xbox Fanatic saying, I thought about buying the Sunday NFL ticket thing on YouTube. Now I'm wondering if I should wait till later in the year and see if it'll be cheaper. I don't know if it'll be cheaper or not. I did the Sunday ticket, especially now it's on YouTube TV. So yeah, the last year I didn't watch the games regularly was the Josh Rosen year, right? Because that was a year stood out. But yeah, Sunday Ticket. I love that it's not with DirecTV anymore, though. You missed that jingle. Oh, are we talking the John Michael Schmitz jingle? Because if that's what you're missing, I am a man of the people.
John Michael, he's our center Schmitz. His name's on my draft too. No matter what they say, this mock is a-okay. It's got John Michael, he's our center Schmitz.
Let's go. All right. I'm glad that you my heart professor. I'm glad y'all like that. That video, that is on my channel somewhere. I think you can watch it anytime you want. I think it's there. I did it as a short. It should be there. So Dan is saying he looks to get more time with the injuries on D-line is why I asked. Oh yeah, no doubt. With some of the injuries, we might see more of Stills for sure. Yeah, I hear you. You know, for me, it's something. It's not cheap, so I get it. I have to if I want to watch it, unless I want to, do something like our pirate. But yeah, yeah, that song takes me back to a better time, right? Yeah, for sure. So, all right. So, do y'all have any questions or thoughts about what you saw in terms of players, player grades? Who's impressing you? Any other thoughts before we kind of wrap this up? Obviously, we've kind of gone over the grades on offense and defense. Again, there's some nice things, and then there's some not so nice things, right? There's some things to be optimistic about. For me, I feel like, I think Trey McBride is maybe the player that, there's other players I'm excited about, but that's the one I'm really liking what I'm seeing in terms of the trajectory, the snaps, the grade, right? And then obviously Dimakaji on the defensive side. So nice, that's nice to see some consistency there. So, yeah. I'm not seeing really any questions or comments, so we're probably going to wrap this up soon. I miss Buddha. He's the heart soul of the team, 100%. His being out is going to be, that's tough, right? If he was playing, you like to think that they would have found a way to win this game, as close as it was, but this is what we're dealing with, right? What changed between halves? Saw more cover three. That's a good question. I wasn't looking at that closely. That maybe that might be part of it with cover three. They're going to be able to attack the seams a little bit more. But it's going to be a little. I think when you're doing that, you're trying to prevent them from making big plays, but they found a way with Jalen Hyatt. So maybe what happened is they just started hitting those players on our cornerbacks. It feels like the coverage was really, really kind of the tough point because they weren't. What we didn't see, at least I don't remember from my watching of it. It didn't look like a game where they were just starting to run on us a lot. The running wasn't really. Let's see, looking at their stats. Kept Saquon Barkley to 63 yards. Daniel Jones had 59 yards. So he's going to scramble. But it seems like, it was definitely much more the passing game. So yeah, I think they just, I think everyone knew what was going to happen. They were going to be trying to go deep. And I think they probably went more with the cover three, and maybe they did some quarters as well. But ultimately they beat up, on Marco Wilson. Holes in the zone were huge. Yeah. So, and maybe part of the issue is maybe Marco's a little bit more of a better at man, he's got some, physical tools. So maybe he struggled. I'd have to look at that. It'd be interesting to see how he did in zone versus man. Do you look at any of the other advanced PFF premium pages, like the receiver matchups? I find that really useful for fantasy. I look at it once in a while. I don't spend a lot of time in those. I do look at like snap alignments and things, but I know that there's a lot of great stuff in there for sure. So, but ultimately, man, it was a discouraging game in a lot of ways in the second half. At the same time, again, Cardinals are supposed to be getting blown out every week, and they're not yet. Probably going to happen this week. Maybe the week after that. But we're frustrated because we thought we had a chance to win this. And we thought, we were up by 20. It was just really an exciting game, and then it wasn't. And so, the expectations even mid-game just were raised and then crashed, right? So, in the big picture, if you told me they won they lost their first 2 games and they were close and they had a chance, but they lost, I would have said, yeah, that's okay. That's maybe a better outcome than what a lot of people are expecting, because a lot of people are expecting us to get blown out every week. The defense, though, yeah, that was rough. Jordan P., appreciate you being here. Thought it was weird they gave that long pass to Marco when it was really on Shashir. Oh, yeah, someone mentioned that earlier. Shashir was the safety playing up top inside. He bit on the underneath route. So, yeah. Ultimately, again, it's a young team. It's a team that's trying to get experience to young players, get them get them comfortable in the system. And it's going to be like this all year. It's going to be rough. Maybe they'll have some nice streaks when Kyler comes back, right? And yeah, right, yeah. Watch Kyler comes back, then we start winning. We see those losses in a worse light, right? Yeah. So I am still optimistic about this team's future. I am not bothered. I mean, yeah, I'm disappointed because I was hoping we were going to pull out this win with the way they started, but I'm not circling the drain. I'm like, okay, we knew this wasn't going to be a good season. We're seeing some things we want to see in terms of young players. Like, they're playing the young players, right? And some players are showing us some things. It's kind of what we wanted to see, right? Yeah. Use this year to vet out who will be the core of the future and crush next year's draft, and we are right on track. Exactly, right? That's been my mentality, and that's how you do a rebuild. And I know everyone's talking about, are they tanking? I'm going to be doing a podcast. I'm recording tomorrow morning with Walter Mitchell and Kyle Ledbetter for the Take It Easy podcast. We'll be talking about that question, because it's not as simple as they're tanking. There's more to it than that. So I'll post that when that podcast is available, when it's been released. So you definitely want to check that out. So, well, hey, listen, thanks for being here. We're going to wrap this up. We're going to do this every week. Look at the PFF grades, talk about the stories we're seeing, what the data is showing us, what things we need to watch for. And yeah, at least we're not the Bears. Right. Right. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to put up the shout outs to the channel members, and then we're going to get out of here, and we will see y'all next time. Peace.